So now, moving on to our first keynote speaker, I'd like to welcome Professor Richard Johnson. Richard Johnson is Emeritus Professor of Medicine at the University of Colorado. Dr. Johnson is a clinician and medical scientist who has been internationally recognized for his work on sugar, and especially fructose and its product uric acid, and how they may play a role in obesity and diabetes. He has been funded by the National Institute of Health and is widely published with over 500 academic papers and several popular books on the subject, of which the most recent of his books is called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. Can you please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to Professor Johnson.
Thank you. Everyone can hear me, right? I'm gonna, first off, Gerhard, I want to thank you for the invitation to come back for this 10th year anniversary of this really great movement to try to remove sugary drinks from schools and try to impose a tax on sugary beverages. And, we've been friends for a long, long time. And it is just an incredible pleasure and honor for me to be here and to tell you the story that we've been unveiling over the last decades on how sugar actually can drive obesity and why sugar is so important to understand, it's dangerous. So we'll begin with the first slide. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk to you about sugar and about a lot of work that I've been involved in, as well as many other investigators in the field, trying to figure out how sugar causes obesity. Next slide, please. So the very first thing is, this is not a surprise to anyone in this audience, but sugar and diabetes have been called the twin epidemics because they are raging throughout the world. In Kuwait, for example, diabetes is present in 25% of the population. In the Pima Indians, it's like 50% of the population, and over here in the Pacific Islands, it's like 20 to 30% of the adult population are suffering from diabetes, and obesity is even more common. We know this, but it isn't just the twin epidemics. We love to say it's the twin epidemics. There's a lot more epidemics going on than just diabetes and obesity. Next slide, please. High blood pressure. In 1900, only 5% of the world had hypertension. Less than 5% in the U.S. And now it's like 30% in adults. It's like and it's a major cause of heart failure, kidney disease. It's like the silent killer. Cardiovascular disease has increased. In 1900, they hardly knew about coronary artery disease. And what you see is a level. And you know why it levels? Because we're learning how to treat it, but we haven't learned how to prevent it. So we're doing a lot of interventions like stents and thrombolytic therapies and this and that, so we can control the mortality. But we need to figure out what's driving the disease. Next. And other conditions like Alzheimer's is increasing even per age group. Cancers, there are these cancers associated with obesity that are increasing, like colon cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, liver cancer. We have to figure out what's going on. This is not, not a good thing. We have a lot of epidemics going. Next slide. And we can look and we can identify the precursor for all of these conditions. The precursor is a condition called metabolic syndrome, which I think most of you know about. It's associated with elevated blood glucose before you're diabetic, so it's kind of a pre-diabetic state. It's associated with increases in blood pressure before you develop severe hypertension. It's associated with abdominal obesity and elevations in fats in the liver and in the blood. And it's got the classic associations on the left side, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, all those things we know. But what's happened in the last 10 years has been the realization that it's also associated with all those conditions on the right. It's associated with behavioral disorders, depression, ADHD, bipolar disease. It's associated with dementias. It's associated with cancers and preeclampsia and aging and sarcopenia or muscle wasting. This is like the supreme epidemic.
It is not one epidemic, it's a million, but it's all driven by one thing. What's driving the metabolic syndrome? Next slide. So what's responsible? Next slide. So a lot of people say, well, it's bad habits. You know, we're eating too much, we've got these bigger plates of food, we go back for seconds, it's all this stuff. You know, foods, they make the food so delicious. They make processed foods that are attracting us to buy them because it's filled with sugar and salt and all these things we like. And it's also where, we're watching more TV, we're on the cell phones, we're not exercising. And you know what? This is all true. This is all true. But is it the cause or the consequence? Are we grabbing more plates of food because the food's there and it's delicious? Or is it because we are still hungry? And I'm going to show you that it's actually the latter that's the main driver. We have been we've activated a process where we seek more food, where we sit around more. And how did we find this? And if diet and exercise could cure the problem, why do we have a multi-billion-dollar industry about it? Because it doesn't work very well. Next slide. So perhaps we need to look at where we can find the answer. And the answer actually is in nature. The answer is in nature. Next slide, please. Because I'm going to tell you a story. You guys remember Aesop's Fables? Aesop's Fables, it's the story of the ant and the grasshopper. So there was winter coming, and the ants went out and got all their food, and they were hiding it in their anthill, and they prepared for the winter. And the grasshopper was sitting there enjoying the summer and playing his fiddle and just doing everything he wanted. He said, why are you guys doing this? Can't you see there's food everywhere? And then winter came, and the grasshopper was frozen and didn't have any food, and he looks down the anthill and he sees all the little ants eating their food. And he realizes that preparation for disaster is something that he hadn't done. Well, nature has actually identified a way to prepare for disaster. And it prepares for when there's no food around. Next slide. And this is what animals do when they know that winter is coming. The bear will suddenly in the fall change its way, where normally it regulates its weight, the weight doesn't go up or down. It keeps its weight stable for its age and growth. And then in the fall, like a trigger happens, and over 2 or 3 weeks they start eating voraciously, out of control. They can't get enough. They have to go back for seconds. They keep going and going, and they eat. They gain 10 pounds a day. They become fat. They become insulin resistant. They get fat in their liver. They get fat in their blood. They have the metabolic syndrome. There's even a show called the Fat Bear Show. Try to find the biggest bear in the fall. And it's also true for other animals, like long-distance migrating birds. They have to get fat before they fly. Nesting birds have to get fat before they nest. There's a whole slew of animals that get fat before the dry season, when there's less food around. This is nature. There's something that triggers this. Next slide. And if you look at a 13-striped ground squirrel that actually hibernates, you'll see that they have the exact same issues going on as the person with metabolic syndrome. Every feature. So, is this abnormal? Where's winter? We keep eating. Unfortunately, we learned how to keep eating through winter. We're smart. We don't have to hibernate, so we just keep getting bigger. So what activates that switch? And why is it activated in us? Next slide. So what triggers it? Next slide. Well, one thing was fascinating when we were looking at this is that in the fall, the fruit starts to ripen. And as soon as it starts ripening, the bears they go out and they look for it, and they don't eat just a few fruit. They eat a ton of fruit. And they use that fruit, and it's been shown, to actually activate a process that helps them gain fat. And so the question is, what is it about fruit? And fruit actually contains a sugar. And that sugar, some people call fructose, I call it fructose. It doesn't matter. It's the same, okay? Next slide, please. So we gave fructose to animals. This is going way, way back. Actually goes back to the early, like 2005. And what we did was we put fructose in the drinking water, and the animals love the fructose because it's sweet and it's like a soft drink, and they drink and drink and drink. But interestingly, in the beginning, they drink a lot of fructose, but they eat a little bit less. They eat less food because they're getting everything from the drink. So they actually stay weight regulated for about 2 weeks, and then suddenly a switch occurs, and they can't control their food, and they eat, and they start eating massively. They get fat and then insulin resistant and fatty liver, and they get the whole darn 10 yards. Next slide. We went on and did tens and tens of studies, truly, and we found that when the animal eats fructose, it doesn't just cause metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome has other features that we haven't described that aren't well known. One is you get hungry. These animals stay hungry. They forage for food, and they maintain their energy while they're looking for food. They'll go out and they'll wander around searching for food, and then when they're not eating, they drop their resting metabolism counts. So their basal metabolic rate actually can go down, even though they can forage. They become insulin resistant. They develop an inflammatory response, which probably helps them to fight off infections. Their blood pressure goes up to maintain the circulation. Their kidney pressures go up to maintain excretion. And they reduce their needs for oxygen. This is a clever thing. I'll show you how it works. But they actually, when you eat sugar, you actually reduce your needs for oxygen. It's really unbelievable. Next slide. Okay, slow down. Slow down. I'm going too fast. Don't we all know that fruit's healthy? Are you telling me that fruits are not healthy? Next slide. Only if you eat like a bear. If you eat 10,000 grapes in one day, you're going to get fat. Okay? We don't eat that much fruit. And we get our fructose from sugary soft drinks and other foods. Sugary soft drinks are the number one. They have so much sugar. That's why I love this conference, the Fizz conference. It's about sugary beverages. And we got to act. Bingo. Okay, next slide. So why? Okay, great. Slow down again. Because, okay, you're telling me fructose is bad. What makes it bad? It's just a calorie, right? And there aren't even that many calories in fructose. Some people think it's saturated fat. Some people from New Zealand. And they are arguing that it's fat because, fat has 9 calories per gram. Fructose has only 4 calories per gram. It does seem to make sense. Why would a carbohydrate cause this? Next slide. And here's the answer. When I was in training, I thought the way you get fat was you eat too much. And what happens is in your body, you are trying to make energy from the food you eat. And that energy is called ATP. Okay? Sorry, it's a chemical, but that is what energy is in the body. And when the ATP gets full, the tank fills up with ATP, the extra energy spills over to form fat, which is like a stored energy. That's why a bear will get fat, because when there's no food around, it can break down the stored fat as a form of energy to release that energy, right? So that makes sense. The problem is we just fill up the gas tank. That's not how it works. That is not how people get obese. The way they get obese is you drop the ATP in the cell. How do you do that? Fructose lowers the ATP and blocks the production of ATP. So now the food has to go somewhere, so it gets shunted to fat. It goes to fat, to stored energy, because you're blocking the production of active energy. So you have low active energy, so you're tired, right? And you can't break down the fat so well to energy because the fructose works that way. So fructose is a signaling molecule. It actually alters the way we metabolize energy. Next slide. So, this is a famous study. You inject glucose into the brain, energy goes up. Because glucose isn't fructose. ATP goes up, the animal feels less hungry, quits eating. You inject fructose in the brain, energy goes down. That triggers hunger, the animal eats more. Fructose is opposite of glucose in how it works. When you give fructose, energy goes down. When you give glucose, energy goes up. Now that's going to be confusing because we all know that carbs in general seem to be bad, right? So you're telling me that glucose is a good carb? Didn't we read Gary Taub's book that glucose is the evil of everything? So we're gonna figure this out as we proceed. Okay, next slide. So the way fructose lowers the energy was key work from my laboratory. And what we found was that there was a specific enzyme that broke down fructose and made uric acid. Uric acid activated the process in the cell to cause stunning of the mitochondria. The mitochondria are what make the ATP, and the ATP levels drop. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to go into all the details of the chemistry. But now, the question is, where is the fructose coming from? Next slide. Sugar! Sugar and high fructose corn syrup. It went from 4 pounds a year to 150 pounds a year that we're eating. We are sugar-aholics. We are all sugar-aholics. It tastes good. It stimulates dopamine. We have receptors for it. We seek sugar. And sugar likes us because we keep eating it. It makes us big and fat. Evil sugar. Next slide. Where's the sugar? It's in processed foods. It's like 80%, 75% of foods in the grocery store have sugar in it. High fructose corn syrup is the other sweetener filled with fructose. Next slide. But there's a major secret source of fructose. This came from work again in our group. And the impact of this is amazing. So it's bad news, but you got to know about it. Next slide. We can make fructose. We don't have to eat fructose. We can make fructose. And guess what drives it? Carbs. Carbs drive it. And it gets converted in the body, in the liver, in the brain, in the heart, in the muscle. All those places have been shown. It's produced. When you eat a pancake that does not have sugar, it has starch. That starch breaks down if the glucose levels go up, it triggers it. When you're diabetic, that high glucose in your blood is making fructose. What drives fructose is glucose. So glucose is bad. When it's not metabolized to fructose, it's not, really. I mean, it can still drive a little bit of fat through insulin. But it's a healthy fat. You don't get insulin resistance. You don't get fatty liver. Next. Don't get hypertension. Next. When you do an oral glucose tolerance test, you can measure fructose levels. It goes up. Next slide. There are other ways to make fructose. So besides carbs, there's some other bad players. Next slide. Salt. Why do deers like salt? They like salt because it stimulates weight gain. How does it stimulate weight gain? Because it activates the enzyme that converts the glucose to fructose. And actually, stress conditions, low oxygen, emotional stress, and even things like MSG, which we add to food, that also can activate it. So there's a whole host of things that can do this. Next slide. If you give salt to animals, over time they become fat. They get insulin resistant. If you give a high salt diet to a person, in 5 days they'll be insulin resistant. It's amazing. Salt is also a driver. Now that's very depressing. Salt can be good if you're on a low carb diet. Actually, salt is good. We can talk about that another time. But basically, salt, when you put the salt on the French fries, they are making the carbs more dangerous because you convert it to sugar. When you eat salted pretzels, the salt on the pretzel is playing a role in your obesity. Next slide. Same thing with that, MSG. We have this receptor called umami. You may have heard of it. It's a savory taste receptor. It's like in soy sauce. The Chinese love MSG because it's used a lot in Chinese food. If you give animals MSG, they become fat. And you give those components are what causes umami. Umami can trigger it too. The good news is we don't eat a lot of umami. That's not the big player. It's sugar that's the major player. Salt, we do eat a lot of salt, but again, it's compared to sugar, it's like nothing. We eat 5-7 grams of salt a day. We eat 30, 40, 50 grams of sugar a day. Okay, next slide. So what are the dark consequences? Next slide. What turns into foraging becomes dementia. What turns into fat becomes obesity. What turns into insulin resistance becomes diabetes. Suddenly you see all the epidemics I told you about. There's a center place. It's fructose. Not just from the fructose we eat. Next slide. I'm going to give you an example of how powerful this pathway is. Let's look at Alzheimer's. Next slide. Alzheimer's is a disease where the brain shrinks. You become demented. It's a horrible disease. It's horrible for the patient. It's horrible for the family. It's associated with these amyloid plaques. They get treatments for amyloid pharmaceutical industry, made like 25 drugs to block amyloid plaques, and they're like lousy. They don't work. So people said, okay, if it's not the amyloid plaque, what's driving dementia? And they look in the early stages, what do they see? Insulin resistance, myocardial dysfunction, low ATP, inflammation. What did I tell you fructose does? When I saw this, I said, oh my God, it's got to be fructose in the brain. What's the evidence for this? Next. So it turns out that the conditions that are risk factors for obesity, for Alzheimer's, are the same risk factors for fructose ingestion. Diabetes, obesity, hypertension are the conditions, sugar intake, high glycemic carb intake. These are all associated with Alzheimer's. These are the same things that drive fructose, either dietary fructose or fructose production. Next slide. If you give sugar, if you look at, like the Framingham, sugar intake correlates with the inability to remember things. The more soft drinks you have, more soft drinks, less memory. Framingham. Next slide. More soft drinks, smaller brains by CT. Framingham's. That's scary. Sugar makes your brain shrink. Think about that before you drink a soft drink. Hippocampus. That's where the recent memory is. CT scans. Soft drinks. Well, smaller hippocampus. You're not going to remember what you ate. You're not going to remember anything. Next slide. You give sugar to rats. First study was really done by Kieran Rooney. You may know him, this wonderful scientist in Australia. You give sugar to rats, they love it. And guess what? They can't get through a maze. After about 4 weeks, they can't get through a maze. This was a study done by a group at UC San Diego. They gave fructose. Again, the rats can't get through a maze. The brain, the insulin signaling is impaired. Hey, that's fructose in the brain. Mitochondria, oxidative stress, mitochondria can't work, low ATP. That's exactly what happens with Alzheimer's. Next slide. Group in Egypt gave sugar long-term, 18 weeks. Next slide, please. They get amyloid plaques in the brain. They get cell protein. Okay, sugar is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. Sugar causes Alzheimer's in animals. What more do you want? There's something more we want. Next slide. We want to know if the brain makes fructose. This is a human study from Yale. You raise blood glucose, like making a person diabetic. Fructose production goes from 0. But look at all this production of it in the brain. in the brain of humans. Next slide. Let's look at Alzheimer's patients. We'll look at different regions of their brain. These are all regions of the brain. Like this is the hippocampus, the first site where Alzheimer's is. Fructose levels are 5 to 7-fold higher in the brain of Alzheimer's patients. So are the enzymes. It's there. Okay? That's what's causing dementia. Next slide. Why? Why would something that's a survival factor that helps bears survive winter, why would this process cause dementia? Next slide. Well, it's because when you give fructose to an animal, it stimulates foraging. Remember I told you it stimulates the animal to forage. Foraging is kind of a good thing. It's like an adventure. I'm going to be the scout that goes to Mars. It can be a good thing, right? It can be. But if you stimulate foraging, pretty soon you can't concentrate very well because you're like it's like a foraging. You have to look around quickly to see the food and to make sure there's no predators. And if you do that process continually, you're going to have ADHD. If you have it a little bit, you might become a genius. But it's a high risk, guys. Excellent. So when you give fructose to a human, you activate the visual cortex so they can see the food. But you have to decrease the self-control so that you are willing you're willing to go into a dangerous area where there might be a lion. The blood flow to the cortex goes down with fructose. The blood flow to the cortex from glucose goes up. But this is only for the first 5 minutes. It takes about an hour for the glucose to convert to fructose. So all these are short-term studies, like 30 minutes. It's very clever. You go out further, and fructose starts to look the same. And fructose reduces the blood flow to the hippocampus. So what happens is you're constantly you're taking fructose and you're constantly stimulating foraging. You're reducing the blood flow. You're inducing insulin resistance. The neurons have low energy and they start to die. And unfortunately, that's what's causing this. What can we do? This sounds desperate. What this conference is doing is fantastic. Okay, we're trying to bring it to light, the importance of cutting out soft drinks. Next slide. And I'm gonna speed up through this because I think I'm behind. But basically, it isn't just the sugar we're eating. We also inherited a mutation that makes us more susceptible to sugar. And this happened millions of years ago. Next slide. There's a mutation. It's in uric acid metabolism. Everyone in this room has it. And it occurred like 15 million years ago. Next slide. And next slide, please. And, it makes us have higher uric acid levels, and so we get gout. Some of us get gout, and that's very high among the Maori. And the Maori have higher uric acids than other people, and so they have other mutations and so forth that might mean that they were the champions of survival. But in the world of sugar, it's not a good thing. Next. And that mutation in uric acid occurred during global cooling. And it was a time when the sea levels fell and the primates made it even into Europe. Next slide. And then as global cooling got worse, there was starvation because the food wasn't available, including the fruits. And they started starving. And that was when the mutation occurred. Next slide. And we actually resurrected those mutations. I worked with some geniuses. Next slide. And we actually resurrected it, and basically what we do is, next slide, is that that mutation amplified the effects of fructose by raising that uric acid. So it amplified it, and that amplification could allow them to store more fat for the same amount of sugar, so they could survive. And to do that, we actually, as I said, resurrected the gene, did studies. Next slide. And if we inhibit that enzyme in animals that can have the enzyme, we can make sugar a lot more potent. We can use a small amount of sugar, and we can make them fat. We can make them diabetic. We can make them hypertensive with even small amounts. So we are super sensitive to sugar. We are sensitive because we had a mutation that made us survive. We would not be here. So we survived because we could survive with very little food. But in this world of food of plenty, we are screwed because now the sugar, we're very sensitive to it, and we're going to get the consequences. Next slide. And the mutation raised the uric acid a little bit. Next slide. But when we ate a lot of sugar, that uric acid went up higher. Next slide. And when it went up higher, go ahead. Next slide. Look at the rate of obesity related to uric acid. A lot of Maoris are around here. It's, diabetes, the rate of diabetes compared to the uric acid level. Next slide. The rate of hypertension with uric acid, the rate of kidney disease with uric acid level. Next slide. And Mendelian, this is a Mendelian test. This is like a genetic test. If you genetically have a higher uric acid, you have a higher risk for Alzheimer's. It was the only risk factor out of 52 studies, 45 possible risk factors. Only one was positive. Uric acid. Next slide. Cancer, same thing. Uric acid's linked with cancer. We actually created, next slide, we actually created a mutation in a rat. Next slide, please. When we made that mutation in a rat, the uric acid went up. They had tumor metastases. We could inject the tumor in the rat and then it just spread dramatically. It's called the Warburg effect. And basically, fructose drives the Warburg effect. That reduces the oxygen needs. That's a survival factor if you're around where there's no oxygen. But if you're a cancer cell, it's exactly what they want. So I'm about to end. Hopefully I didn't go too long. But excessive fructose is a bad guy. Next slide. So what are we going to do about it? Next slide. Well, we can get Ozempified. We can take Ozempic. Super expensive. It works. It actually looks really good. And actually it looks like it blocks the fructose pathway. But as soon as you stop it, you get the rebound. So you're going to spend a ton of money, and then you're going to have to take it forever. There may be a day that happens for everyone. Maybe. But it would be better to do it by diet. It would be better to actively find a way to block it. So you can do diets that reduce carbs, especially sugar. Low sugar diets, low carb diets, keto diets, intermittent fasting. And let's all stop the fizz, let's stop the soft drinks. Everybody, please, let's just clap to stop soft drinks. We gotta do it. Gerhard, this is a great movement, what you do in this country. And things like cutting out carbs can improve cognition in people with Alzheimer's. These are small pilot studies. We need to do more, but the data's developing. Same thing for keto diets for behavioral disorders, keto diets for cancer. Next slide. Another thing, stay hydrated. Drink a lot of water. Reduce your salty foods. There's this. Next slide. We actually can block fructose effects. This is high fructose corn syrup. We're looking at body weight. These are mice. If you start giving water, hydrate them, you can block the effects of sugar. Everyone should drink 8 glasses of water a day. It's possible to over-drink water. So be careful that you don't drink like liters and liters, but like 2 to 2.5 liters of water a day is good. And if it's really hot, maybe you can drink a little more, but don't just drink water after, because you can intoxicate on water. 2 liters of water a day. We did a study and people were giving salt in their soup. As soon as you give them salt in their soup, you activate the switch. You get thirsty, the switch is activated. And the blood pressure goes up. Within minutes, they produce cortisol, all these things within minutes. It's from fructose. But if you hydrate, if you get the salt in water, so that the sodium concentration in the blood doesn't go up, you block the hypertension. And you block all that release. Staying well hydrated is key. The reason people are on a low salt diet, it's not the amount of salt, it's the balance of salt and water. If you eat a ton of salt, drink a lot of water. Just try not to get thirsty. If you're thirsty, you've activated the process. All right, next slide. And then there's supplements, vitamins. There's an alternative sugar I'll talk about in a second. There's green tea. This should be dark chocolate. Sorry. That should be dark chocolate. Sugar is dark. I know that sugar is dark, so I think I screwed up that slide. I was just thinking ominous things, dark. But Abicatechin is in dark chocolate. It actually is healthy. It help the mitochondria mess up. And this is called allulose. It's a new sugar. I have to confide that I have joined a group that sells this because I'm intrigued with the science. So I'm a member of the chief science office. But it just got approved in New Zealand like a few weeks ago. And it's a low-calorie sugar. It's natural. It's low glycemic, and it doesn't activate the switch. So it's sort of hidden next life. And if you give it, you can actually induce a little bit of weight gain, and you can block glucose rise from baby sugar. So it's just another sugar, a low-calorie sugar, but it seems to have some benefits. We'll have to see how it develops with more and more studies, but it's interesting. So, evolution is continuing as we speak. It's a slow process to beat this sugar down, but everyone read the packages. If there's sugar in it, know it's not good for you. Just cut back on it. Cut back on the pancakes, the rice, the potatoes. Drink more water. And let's stop the soft drinks. Let's go for the fizz. All right, thank you.